tell us the cloud native infra, pipeline, code, AI, general hot take. And while panelists think, audience, feel free to think of questions. There'll be some time at the end if you have any.
I would say 3 years ago, everybody using Kubernetes shouldn't have been using Kubernetes. And these days, everybody using Kubernetes should be using Kubernetes.
Progress. I don't know. Should I be hitting this or no? Hot take.
Open source licenses don't really matter that much.
So good. Yes, it was a hot thing. Yeah. Somewhere along it just died.
And maybe I have something to add. Software supply chain for AI is a real problem. Think of someone poisoning the well and putting your model weights or bad data or bad models. So this is something to think of and be aware.
All very spicy hot takes. Another softball. Any tools you used recently that make your life easier that more of us should know about?
So for Kubernetes, I use K9s or Canons, the best tool. I mean, if you're doing complex workflows in Kubernetes and you need to debug stuff, that's the go-to. I use kubectl. I like kubectl. I'm a command line junkie, but TUI, man, if you like Vim, you like K9s, period.
I use this editor called Zed that I really love. And I've been playing with Ghost TTY, which is Mitchell's still beta terminal. It's really sweet. So, yeah.
Zed. I keep on hearing Cursor and Sonnet 3.5, so.
I heard about Cursor also this week, but it's too late. I'm using Zed now, so.
I was going to mention this tool called Vim you might have heard of, but Ofir already stole that. I don't know if I use it every day, but I have tried to automate my life using Darren Shepard's new GPT script, which is really super cool, mind-blowing, kind of gives you a hint of maybe where programming is going in the future. A lot of fun. I wouldn't say I use it on a daily basis, but occasionally I try to automate away all the chores I don't want to do.
Such as what chores? I'm curious.
Oh man, writing decks.
His deck was made by GPT script.
Well, actually, personal things. I find that I enjoy work life so much that I just completely starve personal life. So I wanted to just follow up, paying bills and following up on tasks and things like that. I have not succeeded yet, but one day.
One day. Still early. How is the rate of adoption of containerization changing over time with the increase in popularity of functions as a service, platforms, and thinner runtimes like edge functions, CloudFlare workers, etc.?
That was like a hot take wrapped in a question.
I try. Limited questions, though.
I've been wondering. I think there's fragmentation going on for sure. I think it's inevitable. But also, I like that the OCI spec has been catching up with things that are not just Linux containers anymore. So I'm pretty sure you could wrap whatever the new serverless thing is in OCI.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
All the stuff you used to bite me on, eventually
Yeah. No, I think it's cool. I honestly did not think this would happen. I kind of written it off, but I think it's happening. So yeah.
I think I thought Solomon was going to start a company to basically build the Docker of serverless, because we don't really have that. We sort of have the building blocks of OCI, and I guess Google Cloud Run sort of shows us what's possible there. But the devil's in the details when it gets to networking and security and integration with all the cloud native services. And in some cases, serverless is actually even more complicated there, because you don't really have the Kubernetes underlying fabric that standardizes a lot of those pieces. So it definitely feels like there's some room for standardization, probably building on top of OCI. Yeah, well, maybe.
Yeah. Never mind. If you read your tweet, it's not around.
Yeah, maybe I'll add to that WASM is trying to take the place of containers. I mean, the industry have agreed on a standard, and it's going pretty well. If you look at AWS Lambda, for example, you can run containers in your AWS Lambda. You don't no longer need to do a zip file and just package your code like it's the 70s. I think containers will here to stay for a long time.
Hear, hear. What are the biggest challenges developers face when working with cloud-native technologies, and how can the community work together to address these pain points?
I think one thing that we actually started Pulumi very interestingly coming from more of a developer perspective. That's why we ended up with programming languages. And I think we learned to embrace the power of the building blocks. But I think it's still very complicated for a developer. You ask them to draw the application architecture on a whiteboard, and it tends to be, 5 boxes, a database, a pub subtopic, a queue. Like, it's very conceptually simple. But when you go to map that to cloud native primitives, there's still an impedance mismatch. And I think we're still trying to figure out what is the ideal interface between the developer and the cloud native infrastructure. Thankfully, it's no longer ticketing. I think Kubernetes and Docker have helped with that. But I still think there's room for improvement in the application model itself.
I feel like as a developer, if you go and work for the big tech companies like Google, you're not allowed to debug things in production, right? There is no such thing. You have distro-less containers, and then something bad happens that you weren't able to catch it at development time, and then what do you do? So if you're in the big tech companies, you have tools, very good tools for SREs, like taking a snapshot of the environment and a core dump and debug it offline. But if you're an early stage startup and you need to sell to enterprises, to banks and that kind of stuff, they won't let you debug your container in production. And then comes a lot of knowledge and a lot of gaps and thinking about how to design my application for observability and how to debug it. So it's a real challenge to find and debug things in production.
I actually thought of a hot take. I'm going to wrap a hot take in an answer.
Feel free to drop hot takes freely.
I think, well, first, CI/CD pipelines, they got to be programmable and all that, so you should use Dagger. But also, I feel like as a community, we dropped the ball on the developer side of containerization, of the container revolution.
Why do you think so?
Well, I think the beauty of containers is that it gave everyone a new type of workload to build a complete platform around. And I think we all set to work on both the production and infrastructure side and the developer experience side. And then I think the general dynamic was that most of the ecosystem is infrastructure people specializing in how to run that stuff at scale. So it was all about, this is going to help us make data centers better, right? And then a few other people were thinking, well, this could also be really cool for the developer experience. And it was really not an intuitive thing for server people to say things like, what if you could run containers on your Mac? Like, that was not something that came naturally, I can tell you that. It was a lot of arguing. And then Docker Compose, right? Stuff like that. And so I think at some point Docker kind of stopped innovating and pushing. And I think as a result, a void appeared. And I think the container ecosystem veered severely towards production and infrastructure, of course, with Kubernetes as the champion and the whole ecosystem around it. So we kicked ass on the infrastructure side, and I think we kind of dropped the ball on the developer side. Like, people write Docker Compose files all the time, and you still can't run that thing in production. Like, what's up with that? We screwed up, right? So, and Helm has not fixed the problem. Right? So, I think that was long, but I think today, I think it's the very simple thing that hurts developers the most in cloud native. Like, they write Docker Compose files, and they can't run them in production. Because we can get it to work. We can agree on how to get it to work. Yeah.
All good answers. And kind of piggybacking off of that, did not send you this ahead of time. How do you not lose sight of developers? You're all executives now. How do you keep developers in mind?
I hang out on Discord all day long, so that's... Then developers yell at me when things are broken, so that's really how I do it.
In my company, we put a lot of emphasis in meeting developers where they are. So shameless plug for Wiz, but it's a platform where both platform engineers and developers meet, where you can trace your vulnerability from production all the way to the CI/CD pipeline and to the commit that caused it with auto-remediation. So if I introduce a vulnerability, I automatically get the PR in GitHub that tells me this is what needs to be fixed. and all I need to do is click on merge. So to me, the developer experience that Salmon mentioned, this is the way to go, because you can only go so much in the desktop. You still need to bring it to production safely and securely.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Is mine okay, or should I switch to? Okay.
That's good, yeah.
Well, it's probably because I'm cheating and holding it, but I've worked with developers for 20 plus years. I mean, it's the thing that got me out of bed in the morning, is making developers productive. And I think obsessing over developer experience when building Pulumi was one of the things that actually differentiated Pulumi compared to some of the other tools. The fact that, a developer tool should bring you joy. You're going to use this thing every single day, and any, shortcoming, any annoyance, it's like having, sand in your shoes, right? Yeah, it might not annoy you now, but you walk a mile down the road, it's going to sure as heck annoy you eventually. And so, and the things that I learned, especially at Microsoft managing developer tools teams, is make somebody 20% more productive. That's a whole day per week of their life that they can spend adding additional value. So that's how we started, but how do we stay connected? I mean, I try to hang out with developers, and we use Slack. We should have used Discord. I wish we could go back and change that. But 3 days after somebody signs up for Pulumi, they get an email from me. It says, do you have any feedback? I still read and respond to every single one. I get like 30 per day now, which is starting to get ridiculous, but I always learn like what's working, what isn't working. Maybe it's the documentation. Maybe it's, something just wasn't as easy. We're missing an example over here. And that helps to stay connected.
And of course, you're all here. Thank you for all being here. What are the key factors driving cloud-native adoption among enterprises? And what are some common barriers that companies face in making the transition?
The transition to cloud native? Yeah. Well, I think I agree with Joe earlier that a lot of them have made the transition. I mean, it's not a perfect transition, but it's well underway. I'm actually curious what Joe's going to say. Because you're further along, so you talk to enterprises probably more than we do.
Well, I think it's different. I would say, I talk about the 3, 4, 5 years ago. I'd hear a lot from Global 2000, Fortune 500 companies who have data centers they're trying to get rid of, and a lot of times they viewed Kubernetes as sort of stepping stone to the public cloud, and maybe that would mean that they'd use Kubernetes in the public cloud, but maybe it was an on-prem, oftentimes hybrid, and a lot of times back then it was talk. Like there wasn't, I didn't see as much actual happening, and these days I see a lot happening. Like Solomon said, like a lot of it is in motion, but I also see a lot of startups that are building from scale from day one. Like if you're building an AI startup, you need to think about scale from day one. You can't just go throw something at the wall that doesn't scale and then fix it as things start to break, like the fail whale. Like you have to architect for scale from day one. And I'm seeing a lot more success with Kubernetes these days than I did back then. Most of the time, 3 or 4 years ago, when a startup was using Kubernetes, I'm like, what are you, nuts? That's like, a jackhammer to hammer a nail or something. But a lot of these startups now do need infinite scale. And I think because as a community, we've matured, the hosted Kubernetes cluster offerings like AKS and EKS and GKE have really matured to be enterprise grade. I think people are finding a lot more success getting up and running than before.
And maybe I'll add to that when you just get started on cloud native, where do you even begin? You have over 200 projects in CNCF. How many of them are graduated? How many are incubated? Everyone has a FOMO, fear of missing out. Hey, I'm not using a service mesh. Will I still be alive tomorrow? All that kind of stuff. So you have the big tech companies pushing a lot in the direction of you have to use Prometheus and you have to use that. You don't have to use anything. You have to ship software and you have to get value out of your business. This is the first thing that you need to have. Then if you have compliance like PCI DSS or that kind of stuff, sure, make sure that you have all the security controls and compliance and checks in place, but keep it simple. Just gradual adoption of technologies. Don't worry, you'll get there.
We're probably influenced by the reason we're talking to enterprises, right? Like probably it's our products or problems that revolve around our products, our respective products. In our case, we talk about pipelines all the time. And enterprises have the worst pipelines of them all, honestly. It's enterprise scale of the problems. So what's really interesting to me when I talk to larger teams is that pipelines become more of a business topic. Actually, even IAs, pipeline for them is like capital P. It's not about CI/CD or any specific tech. It's really about the capital P pipeline, like R&D, market. There's an arrow, and that's the pipeline. So that's really interesting to me because obviously the tech enables that, and we're here building this tech, and we want to make sure it solves an actual problem, and we want to make sure they know about it so they use it. But yeah, just the connection between the pipeline as a technical thing and the pipeline as the business thing is really interesting. So, yeah.
I like that. Thanks. Okay. If you had to make one bold prediction about the future of pipeline, security, AI, infra, general cloud native, what would it be?
So security's got to be by default, not an afterthought. And I think, unfortunately, today it's still an afterthought for a lot of the customers we work with, which is why a lot of the work that Wiz and other folks are doing is really important. But how do we bring that into the inner development loop so that software is secure by default? You hear a lot about software supply chain, but not just that, but cloud configuration, attack vectors. I mean, it's kind of a scary world out there. People want to move fast, but the risk profile is just insanely high for a lot of these enterprises.
I agree with Joe. I think if we had IDPs, internal developer platforms, and everything around platform engineering actually living up to their promise of delivering a golden path with secure defaults. So if you take GKE or OpenShift, they really care about the security of their platforms, right? And they make things very hard for developers and for developers to onboard, but at least they give you guardrails so you don't just ship lousy or insecure software by default. So I think this will be a big thing. And the next thing would be AI to help us ship software faster and more secure. Today, if you go to ChatGPT, you get a random container image. God knows who built this image and when. So we have to have some kind of security governance around that and software supply chain, like using chain guard for base images, all this kind of stuff.
These are not easy questions.
I aimed at
Right? 5 years? So, yeah.
maybe 1 year,
Oh,
few
wow.
weeks. Feel free to.
That's a very different question.
Bold prediction in general. Kind of
Okay.
Ease them.
No, I mean, 5 years is fun. It's like 2029.
Isn't that when AI takes over?
Oh,
Is that the rate Kurzweil?
this is when GPT script takes over, and Darren rules us all. We're not allowed to like anything he hates. No more Kubernetes. No. Well, one topic that I find really interesting that's kind of developing is you can't really. 5 years is fun because you can think about things that are important, but you don't have time to think about every day, right? Like I don't have a 5-year plan. I mean, I pretend I do when someone asks me, but like startups shouldn't have a 5-year plan. But I think that it's really interesting what's happening, the collision between the software, the open source software ecosystem and the open source models and the ecosystem, because those are not really the same definition, obviously. But I think the definition is the least of our worries, because everything's different. Like what does it mean to compile a model? Like, okay, great, the weights, I have the weights, but like if you pull on the weights, you get all of the internet, like data, lots of data. And so what happens to that? Like everything breaks, like the legal framework breaks. Like GitHub, what's GitHub for data? That's not a thing, like what's a pull request? What does it mean to collaborate? Like the data ecosystem is a really cutthroat, very money-oriented, zero-sum ecosystem, right? And like it's backstabbing and secret deals and like stealing data and suing people to get back at them and all that stuff that's going on right now. And meanwhile, in software, we're like la la la, we're competitors, but I love you. Here's a pull request, So that's going to clash. I think 5 years seems about right. Yeah.
So I think we're all going to go work in the data ecosystem. And now I think we'd like to open this up to questions from the audience.
Thanks for the wonderful session here. What do you think about standards and what kind of standards evolve? Many people are building more simplicity, more orchestration, more orchestration to orchestration, hyper orchestration. What kind of standards you see evolve in these areas?
Well, I have a pet peeve standard that I wish existed that is sort of related to this, but obviously I'm biased because of what I work on, but there is no standard for what a cloud infrastructure resource is. And if that existed, then we could build an ecosystem of tools that agreed what a cloud resource is. And what I mean by that is an S3 bucket, an EKS cluster, an Azure function, an Azure app service, Kubernetes pod, all these things have their own definitions of what a cloud service is and what configuration it has. And if there was a standard here, and Terraform providers are kind of the de facto standard, even though it's only subservient to the Terraform ecosystem, but Crossplane, Pulumi, a lot of other folks have figured out how to tap into the Terraform provider ecosystem. I've been calling it open cloud providers. Imagine CNCF had open cloud providers. Wiz could use that, Pulumi could use that, Chef, Puppet, Ansible, SaltStack. A lot of people would benefit from that. And I think as an ecosystem, we would all be able to have 1 + 1 = 3 rather than each of us sort of building our own undifferentiated silos to try to understand what the cloud is. So it's not directly in the orchestration space, but I think it would unlock a lot of interesting orchestration scenarios.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
My follow-up question is, do you think OpenTofu somehow is a step towards that? Or no?
Possibly. I think the provider model in Terraform is very specific to Terraform and HCL, but we've been able to bridge it, and a lot of people have been able to bridge it. And so I think if we could leverage that IP, because there's thousands of human years, maybe even tens of thousands in building those providers. So I'm hopeful. And I have actually talked to the OpenTofu guys about it, and possible.
I have standard burnout, so I'm going to pass on the standard question.
Thank you. Hello. So I know we are in a cloud-native event, but question. So with the merge of AI application, a lot of hardware which is needed, what do you think about potentially a mix and hybrid between on-prem / cloud facilities? How do you see that?
I think that's one thing I did notice with enterprise adoption, that's very standard now to think in this way and bifurcating on-prem workloads from cloud workloads. I think when it started, the hybrid and private cloud was kind of seen as a stopgap. Okay, eventually Amazon will eat everything, so let's just kind of pace ourselves. Now it's okay, no, some workloads will never go over there. They'll stay here, and it's kind of accepted. So I think it's going to become very common. Also, wherever the GPUs are, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think most large customers I talk to, they've sort of admitted to themselves that they're going to permanently be in this world, and it could be for security and compliance reasons. It could be, firewall, air-gapped environment reasons. It could be, we work with a lot of gaming companies, and a lot of gaming companies are very privacy conscious. They don't want their game to leak, and so they manage their own data centers. Financial institutions, I would say a lot of the hybrid, enterprises view maybe the cloud as burstable temporary infrastructure, even for workloads that might run on-prem, and those are some of the more interesting hybrid workloads. But some just say, hey, this workload's going to run here, this workload's going to run there. But I very much agree. I think it's a hybrid world, possibly forever.
Yeah, and I would add, it is a hybrid world, and you see a lot of companies shifting back to on-prem, maybe because of the cost, maybe because of data sovereignty, that kind of stuff. And there is a huge fallacy around, I'm on-prem, so I'm safe. I've seen it many times that, someone opens a port to the APT package manager because we just need to fix this tiny bug, and then you go home. I'll fix it later. So just because you are blocked and this is in your premises doesn't mean anything about, from a security perspective, doesn't mean that you're safe. So more security concerns, more money for other companies.
Yeah, it's like we've been burned by cloud, so people started romanticizing on-prem, It's like romanticizing, in like the Soviet times, oh, remember, things were easy. You just kind of forget the bad things. And anyway.
Unfortunately, a lot of people are complacent, is what I see as well. They think, oh, I'm on-prem, so therefore I am secure, and actually take their eye off the ball even more, which is ironic because a lot of things are actually more difficult on-prem.
Do you feel there's people are realizing that? They're kind of waking up to that reality? Or asking both of you, like what you were saying? Like, are they blind to it, or is it getting better or worse, I guess?
Yeah, I think the main question is, where do you start? How do you do inventorying? How do you know what machines do you even have in your possession? So when you're in the cloud, you have auditing and you have an API-driven way of knowing what is the current security posture and what resources do I have and what is their status. When you're on-prem, you have to go to either OpenStack or all your own thing, right? Facebook have their own infrastructure and their own way of doing things. MasterCard have their own way of doing things. So how do you standardize, and how do you find new talent? You hire new DevOps. Now he needs to learn, in addition to AWS API, now I need to learn another proprietary API. So it quickly gets out of hands. This is the way I see it, at least.
Yay. Back to the 5 years, 2029. Trying to figure out how to ask a short question, not a long one. Like 5 years in the future, are we still going to fight, technology that's wrapped, like technology from the 70s and from the 80s that is sort of like wrapped and put into the cloud, where perimeter security, the Unix process model, POSIX and all that, where we wrap it into a CRD and then we deploy it into a Kubernetes cluster and all that? Or, will we be able to kind of close the gap a little bit more where the shape of compute is more fluid? Something like, I'm just going to say WASM for the lack of having a better term. I'm not going to say that has to be the winner. But is that even a goal? And is that something, that we will even work towards in 5 years, right? So I don't know what the right question is. It's just like kind of curious about reactions. Thank you.
Why not?
Yes. So the thing is that why can't we focus more on plug-and-play solution? Because the main problem in all enterprises is scaling and stability. So that's the most problem. And when we go to the enterprise, most of the developers in the enterprise, they try to reinvent. Although we say don't reinvent the wheel, they try to reinvent the wheel. That's where the complex problem of all the pipelines come. So why can't we focus more on plug-and-play solution rather than just kind of reinventing or kind of implementing new tools again and again?
Kind of feels like we're buffering questions, but they're two different questions, I think. But I'll take the first one. Yeah, no, I see. So you're kind of responding, expanding on the question. Well, the part that resonates with me is, can we actually like make drastic changes in the stack to simplify and like stop paying? Can we pay down some of the technical debt, at least from the 60s? Before we take another loan? That sounds like what you were asking. Like, I'll take that one because I have a lot of opinions on that one, because that is kind of what we were hoping to do with Docker, and I think we had an opening to actually get there, but the opening closed. But the need is still there for sure. I think the hard part, because WebAssembly stuff the hard part is not finding better tech that people could use, is to find a way for them to use it.
Yeah, it's like how to get there, right?
Because you can't burn stuff down and rebuild, because things have to keep running. So you need to prop up what's there, and then you need facades. Like, okay, let's put up this facade while we break this thing. And so it's really like the opportunity to hold something up and redo the foundation without collapsing. That's that's the rare moment. And then when the opportunity arises, you got to seize it. And I think with Docker, I think we had an opportunity, and we didn't go all the way there. But like, I think CRDs are like a mistake. Is it CRDs? I mean, that's like, I would ignore that.
Yeah, I was trying to make a bad example.
No. Anyway, yeah. Sorry, this is a long answer, but like, I think the pipeline thing is one that I'm excited about. Like, if things become DAGs, if applications become DAGs, okay, so now we can prop things up a little bit, and so it's a DAG of old things. So then you have a new API to orchestrate a DAG of old things, but then you can start swapping out some old things with some new things, one box at a time. So that's my approach right now. That's kind of why I'm spending so much time on this problem with Dagger. You know, like if we crush it, we get another chance. You know, to collapse the stack a little bit and pay back some of those tech debt loans. Yeah.
Right.
Sorry, long answer.
Yeah, I think this is probably a discussion over beer, or perhaps even whiskey, actually, once we get into it far enough. But I actually worked on a distributed operating system at Microsoft that was intended to just reinvent the entire stack from the ground up. So no Windows, no Linux, all type safe, memory safe, concurrency safe, all process isolation. So basically, this is just before Docker kind of came out, was inspired by some of the early LXC work where you use software isolation, everything was message passing, highly concurrent, even the NIC, the file system driver, all type and memory safe. If you look at, I love ChainGuard, what they're doing, but isn't it a shame that there are CVEs to begin with? And every single one of them is use after free, and like shit that should have gone away 30 years ago because we now have type safe, programming languages. And that is using C, right? Linux is still largely using C. Although Linus did admit that he would welcome pull requests that, start converting parts of Linux over to Rust, which I think would be fantastic. It's going to happen someday. But the problem is like the core of the system that we're building on top of is just fundamentally unsafe. And one of my biggest learnings with this operating system project, we actually got it to the point where it was running production workloads at Microsoft, is actually running the speech recognition server, a lot of the deep neural network stuff in the early days of Azure and Bing. You got to have the go-to-market reason for that change to take place. You can have the best tech in the world, but if you don't have something pulling you into the market or driving it with somebody like Microsoft or Apple or somebody that has sort of significant influence over the market, it's going to be really tough. Otherwise, you just have to kind of eat it from the ground up, like replace bits of Linux with Rust, components, and maybe we get safer over time, but it's not that revolutionary kind of world that you're looking for. My short answer would be, I hope we get there. Yeah.
I really think those two answers are connected, because it's really about, someone who wants to actually have that kind of impact, you have to be hunting for opportunities for leverage. And I think of them, they're windows that open and then they close. And what you do during that window is you get critical mass, and then you leverage that critical mass to implement change. And so a lot of things have to align, because to get to critical mass, you need to be incremental. You need to meet people where they are. And then once you have critical mass, you have to not screw everyone over, because they're here for incremental, but somehow you have to also give them a radical change that they like, and you can only pull off because you have the critical mass. So it's like politicians that, they get elected and they promise everything. They have to say what people want to hear, and then they have a decision to make. Do they actually implement change, possibly pissing off their voters, but they're spending the points they earned to kind of make progress the way they see it. And so it's really the same thing with platforms. It's a governance exercise, and usually you spend the points, and then if things go really right, it actually doesn't kill your business. Also, you make money from it. So you need a business reason to do it. Yeah. But usually it comes with growth, right? So tons of new workloads. So in this case, AI, everything's changing. Everything's kind of, the deck is kind of reshuffled. So usually that's when these windows open. So I'm excited for that,
Great answers and discussion. And we are at time for the panel. So thank you, Solomon, Ofir, and Joe. Okay.
Okay.